Hello and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 1079th New Social Environment. I'm Chloe Stagaman, Director of Programs here at the Rail, and I have the honor and joy to be your MC today for a conversation featuring Amy Sillman and Charles Bernstein on the occasion of To Be Otherwise on view at Gladstone Gallery, New York through June 15th. And now I'll introduce Amy and Charles. Amy Sillman has lived and worked in NYC since the mid-1970s. She is best known for her rigorous formal engagement with painting and iterative drawings and an excavation of form that lies between abstraction and figuration. Over the decades of her practice, Sillman has developed a rich, open-ended exploration of how painting might work in relation to diverse media, and in particular, questions of time and sequence. She's experimented with embedding painting with such forms as animations, digital printmaking, large-scale drawing, installations, and zines. Sillman's work has been exhibited widely in the USA and in Europe, and her works are in many private and public collections. Her collection of art writing, Faux Pas, is in its third reprint since its initial publication in 2020. And our host today, poet Charles Bernstein, is the winner of the 2019 Bollingen Prize for Near Miss and for Lifetime Achievement in American Poetry. He is the author of Topsy Turvy and Pitch of Poetry. And with that, I am going to pass it over to Charles to get us started.
It's great to be here and to be with you. Program 1079. There must be a mystical significance to that number, but I don't know what it is yet. But I want to congratulate you, Chloe and Fong, and all the people at the Rail for those 1078 shows before this, and to inaugurate your much needed hiatus or break until the fall, which is a big thing for this series, which has been going continuously. So this is the last show before that break. And I want to thank you for all the people who you've supported and who've participated with you over the time that you've been doing this. Amy is going to walk us through the fantastic show at the Gladstone Gallery, up now. Go and see it. It's not on for that much longer. And it's a spectacular presentation of her work. Amy, first question before we go through all those slides, what's the scale of the show? How many works are in it, and what kind of work, and over what time period did you do it? And then we'll go and show the paintings.
Okay, thanks. By the way, first, just thank you, Chloe, Eleanor, Fong, Rail, everyone there, Charles, and everyone in Charles's family. And thanks for the invitation to have this conversation. I'm very, very honored. Okay, so the works that we have slides of my show that kind of walk you through in the sequential order that you would see it if you walked through. You would arrive at the desk here where there's a pile of zines, and a zine person who doesn't take the money. I'll explain that later. She's just there. And the work, just to answer Charles's question before we start walking through, when you get in to see the desk and then you turn to the left to enter the gallery, you see a video that's looping, which is a piece that I made with my friend Marina Rosenfeld. And yes, and I want to just go back to the zine. I made the zine with my friend John Hulsey. So there's two collaborative things that you see when you enter the very first foyer. And then you go into there's the zine. Then you go in and then you see the Marina and me collaboration, which we made for the Washington Post, actually. And we'll talk about that later. But it's a video made out of drawings, some of which are seen in the show. And then you enter the show, and the show has about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, has something like 12 or 13 paintings and a wall of about 100 drawings or 85 drawings. And we can walk through slowly, so we don't have to quite move in yet. But these paintings, the bigger ones are 66 by 75 inches approximately, and the smaller ones kind of range from 59 by 55 inches to smaller than that or a little bit bigger than that. So they're kind of medium sized, and then get up to as big as I can carry them with my own body, which is very, we can talk about that later maybe, but which has to do with the fact that I don't have people helping me make my paintings, and I don't like anyone to come into the room when I'm making them. So I do have an assistant and a person who also does my books and people that I work with for sure, happily, but they never come into my painting room. And so this is a kind of work that, because I'm the one moving it around, and it's very much and often moved, put on the floor, picked up, taken to the sink, taken back, twirled around. It has to be something that I can carry and that I can fit in and out of places. So it's kind of one man band, one person band kind of scale. Anyway, this is where you walk in. This is the wall that confronts you. Uh, I want to just say for in honor of my own work, I told Charles and Chloe the other day that you can't really see these paintings unless you see them in real life. And they were like, no, no, you really can. We had a big hubbub about whether or not you could or couldn't. And then my cousin came to town from Seattle to see my show, Denny, my beloved cousin, and his partner, Unja, whom I adore. And they went to see the show and sent me a text about a half an hour ago that said, we're really glad we came. You can't see these paintings unless you see them in real time, which I really liked, because it's not just space, but it's about time, which we will discuss. Anyway,
I
then
do think they look
say that.
great in person. And you have to go and see them if you can. Many people watching this won't be able to see these particular paintings, but I
Right,
also
I'm
think
just
that the
saying,
reproductions we're going to look at also look great. But there's no question that the real thing is not reproducible.
yeah, there's too many layers. Anyway, if you want to go to the next thing, like this is actually one of the paintings that's the one on the left in this wall. And then if you go to the next one, I don't want to hurry too much, but this is the second one in the line. We just wanted to give you a feeling of the individual kind of surfaces and how they kind of feel, and then the layout of the room. These are the ones on the end of the first wall. And I think if you go to the next slide, it's the wall across from, oh, sorry, more individuals. And then you see kind of how they're set up in the wall. And I think the next slide is this is if you turn, and this is what's behind you when you enter. And this wall, where the first wall is kind of crammed, over crammed, as I've been told by some friends and critics. But the first wall is very crowded, and the back wall is just this one painting and a drawing that kind of rhymes with it, which I'm not even sure we have the picture of, but the painting alone on the wall, yeah. Then there's a small drawing in a frame that was for me like a kind of entree to these whole body of works. It was made before, and it came from a series of about, I don't know, 40 drawings that I did last summer. And it was the first time last summer where I was making this work where I thought, I'm finally getting to something. It's a kind of dismantled diagrammatic torso, which is how I see it. And I realized that this show was going to be torsos. And we can talk about this more later too, but when I was making the first one that I made, I was listening to books on tape of the first female translator of the Odyssey, Emily Wilson, and the book on tape was read by the actress Claire Danes, which was exciting because she's a great reader. And I was listening to these ancient, sagas of voyage and travel and hero and heroine and, foe and epic kind of, encounter and struggle and problem and love and hate and war and death. And while I was listening to all this, I was conceiving of a set of torsos that wouldn't necessarily have heads, because then it would sort of become portraiture, which is what I didn't want. But they mostly confronted you at the kind of trunk of your body. And that's what I was kind of thinking with this when I was making these particular set of drawings, of which this is only one, I started really feeling like these are a kind of diagrammatic torso. So I put it right in front. Anyway, we can move on. So then you turn to go forward and you see this painting, which is called Ghost. And then you go into the next room. There it is. Then you go in, which we can keep going into. And you're sort of confronted with this giant wall of, I think it's about 85 drawings, of which, I mean, this is about a third of as many as I made. And it's what I could fit at Gladstone. I wanted to just sort of fill the back wall. And I also wanted to indicate a kind of sequentiality. So these were made exactly in the order. I mean, there were many left out from this edit, but from left to right, from top to bottom, is the order of this series of drawings, which is called UGG for 2023. There's about 300 of them altogether. And I wanted this to connect to the video in the very front, because these works are partly about working in an order and then ordering the order and editing the order and re-editing the order for a time-based viewing, which is a video, or it could be a reading of a poem. There's lots of ways to be time-based, obviously, but I always want to kind of stage time-basedness as being a component of painting. So that's what this wall is kind of trying to do. And then,
And I just,
yeah,
um, one thing it's hard to see in this reproduction is just how big this is. Now we can see from the caption that each one is 32 by 23, but it's gigantic.
yeah,
And
maybe there's a
actually,
slide with a person. I think that one of these slides has a, for scale, maybe not.
yeah, that it gives you,
It's a
but even
big
so,
wall. You
the
can see
scale
it's
when
a
you,
really big wall.
and it's bigger than any of the paintings. So there's a kind of interesting irony, perhaps, where drawings often in an art show are less imposing than the paintings. You've reversed that dynamic.
I think that's very great to say, Charles, because I think of myself as a drawer, and I don't really think of myself as being called a painter. And we can talk about what that means if we want to get into it. But I feel like the fundamental proposition of my work is about drawing. And so I want the drawings to feel not like sketch or preliminary rehearsal of any kind, but to feel like the main thing. And I think the difference between these two things is just that in the paintings, the drawings are layered so densely over such a long period of time. Like I was talking to a friend the other day at a studio, and he said, I make a painting a week, so I make 50 paintings a year, which sort of blew my mind because I make about 8 paintings a year. But I think inside the painting is about 100 paintings, and they're really different from each other. And when I say inside the painting, I mean layers that are completely wiped out many, many times over. So it's not a developmental thing, but the drawings sort of indicate a kind of developmental logic. And so I wanted to kind of reveal that. I always want to reveal that, and I always want drawing to be fundamental to the
Now,
whole.
the title of this whole set is Torsos and Words. What are
Well,
the words?
well, the words are after I made 200 torsos, I decided to take out another big stack of paper and just really fast and furious. These were all made very fast and furious, but I thought I've been working with torsos, and now I think I'll work with words, just for a kind of dialectic. And so I decided to do it in honor of the Baroness, what's her face?
Elsa von
Yes,
Freytag-Loringhoven?
yes, the Baroness Elsa von
Wonderful.
Freytag-Loringhoven, whose beautiful book I have, the one called Body Sweats, and she has
Yes,
these,
my book about her, but yes, yeah.
yeah, but in there's a whole bunch of her works which are kind of poetry, poem,
Mhm.
fragment, like lists lists of things and exclamation, kind of sayings and half sentences and pointing at stuff and exclaiming. And they're like these crazy things that you would be thinking if you were like totally on speed, which maybe she was. And it's just like your brain is popping. And I wanted to not write words, but write something that comes out of your body. And this is the way I think of painting, that it comes out of your body and it's not really a thing yet. It's not an icon. It's not an image. It's not a symbol. It's not anything really. It's a kind of mishmash. And also in the time we're living at, a lot of the things that come out of your body are like things like, ugh, which is what UGH is when you say it. And I wanted to just express, how do you say, like, this was like a joke I made on expressionism. I was expressing word, thought, feeling sounds that came out. And as they came out, I would write them really quickly. And then I would just cover them with like one shape and then move on. So I made 200, which were in the logic of a kind of sequential activity of a figure, like the foibles and follies of a person whose body is doing things, turning into different things, becoming things, leaning different ways, encountering different forms. And then the expressions were like the first syllable in your head before it even forms into a word. And so I just thought I'll record this how do you, like this sort of alinguistic sound formation, which is kind of infantile, I guess, or angry, or just very affective. And I thought, after I started doing it, I thought, these are the words that you say if you are not saying words, but you're getting there. It's kind of half and half. So I thought that this was another form of half abstraction, half figuration. Anyway, if you look to the right, you see a series of paintings. If you maybe go to the next, this one's called the banana tree, but maybe go to that. Yes, so you see the wall. Then there's another kind of crammed up wall, but I don't find these things too crammed up. These are walls that for me are like, I mean, look, I'm kind of not a minimalist, at least. So it's a sequence. And it's like taking you, I put the little one in that second, for example, because it was the perfect bridge between the third one and the first one. And I wanted walls with sequences of paintings that were both iterative in the same way the drawings are, in the sense that there's a visual logic of bridging one thing to another, but I also wanted cuts and breaks so that like between number 3 and number 4, there was a real cut and there was a new thought about how form and torso might be structured. So it was kind of about structure. Some structures are reaching towards the next one and some are cutting and kind of contradicting the next one. And all of that kind of drama is for me like what's going on in my studio when I'm making a painting is all of that. It's continuity and then contradiction and then interruption, and all of those layers are present when I'm making a work, which takes me a really long time. So I guess I'm hanging a show that looks as close as I can get to something like my process.
Okay, so here's the one I wanted to just stop, do a little bit of close looking on, and have you just talk about a single painting. I didn't pick this for any significant reason, but I was, of course, attracted to the title. And I want to ask you about that. But one thing you might talk about here is what you did say yesterday, and what I objected to was almost more like a joke, but you said there was no relation of the original to the reproduction, which, by the way, I love as a statement. And I just said, well, there's some relation. But what is in the original that you can't see, that the viewer is looking at this? What would you say that they can't see, looking just at this image? I understand we see the whole show, we see the dynamic between the works, where a physical body's in space. But just if you came up close and looked at the Gladstone Gallery, at this painting, what would you see that you don't see in this reproduction?
Well, one thing is that the color is way richer. So that's just, give it give it a 30%, 30 to 75% off for bad color. That's what
Well,
happens.
that's important. Is it the
Repro.
intensity of the color? They're more
Oh, it's
intense?
everything. It's the
Yeah.
surface, it's the scraping, it's the grading, it's the physicality of the touch. When you come up to it, you can see all the way to the back of the painting in certain places, literally like you can see the bare canvas in a little crook at the bottom between the figures, like in the back of their knee, if you kind of think of it as a knee. And then you can go all the way to the front where you can see that, like, you can actually physically feel how much lumps and bumps and overpaint. You can see this kind of buildup, but you can also see the distinction between negation and accumulation. And so you can feel all of that, and you can feel the weight of color in your hands. You can see which things are see-through and which things are really obliterative, and you can feel the kind of verbal action of like how colors sit and bleed and soak in and go against. You can see this like total struggle going on all over the place, like constantly. That's sort of, and then what I'm busy doing is kind of like organizing it in sequences that move forward. So it's kind of a 3D chess game, because it goes forward and back and up and down and sideways, and then it goes into areas and edges and little toggling between things that sort of appear to be behind a little bit, but you can't see how far behind, and other things that feel like they're really away from you, and then things that are like oddly obliterated. And maybe it's a good time to say at this moment, this thing that I think, we were maybe going to kind of talk about, which is that I think is sort of interesting, which is that about 10 years ago, I found out, after living for 68 years, I found out after half a century that I can't see space, that I have this condition called lack of convergence. So apparently I've never seen depth resolved as perspectively in my eyeballs. And so I was standing with my assistant, Jake, the other day, looking at this painting, and not the other day, but like last month. And I was saying, look at that little blue triangle between the figure's kind of chest or maybe breasts, and then where there's kind of crook of this thing that comes over that's kind of like an underarm. Look at that little blue patch under their underarm. That's behind, but it also sort of pops forward. And what I'm always looking for is this toggle, spatial toggle, where figure and ground are literally ambivalent and totally involved in a kind of irresolvable conflict. And then I realized when I was standing there with Jake, oh my God, Jake, this is literally how I see figures. I'm looking at what looks to me like a perfectly reasonable figure standing there with like a bird draped around its shoulders, but you think it looks like a Picasso thing or a Cubist thing. But that's because I'm actually trying to re-pop the space out after it's been historically flattened for years. And obviously we can talk about this too, or anyone can, but space has been toggling back and forth between spatial, planar, perspectival, flat, completely flat, not even there, for years and years. But I'm interested in this figure ground situation of wildly complex and ambivalent relationships between those things. And then there's relationships between color that you can't perceive in 3 times generation, third generation not really being there. So that's what you can't see, really.
I mean, we were going to talk about your eyesight and the 3D stereo. Let's continue with that. One thing, of course, in appreciation for the NSE that you can't see if you go to the show is you're talking about this painting. So that's something that we're able to do digitally that's special to this.
No,
Also,
I'm not a Luddite. I love digital.
no, I understand you're not. I'm just saying
Yeah.
it's a great experience
Yeah,
to
I'm not.
have this one image and have you talk in combination. Actually, they could put up a video, or you could have it on headphones, which I hate, but this is a perfect thing. The other thing is, and the following is a joke, which people don't seem to be able to always get on Zoom. In the actual show, of course, you can go behind the painting and inside it and walk around, because
Yeah.
it is able to enter into it as a four-dimensional space and sit down and have your lunch and all the rest.
Right.
Whereas when you're seeing it on the screen, you're stopped by the screen. When I'm looking at this, I see the albatross foregrounded and the color, the larger color areas in the back. Do you not see that way? You don't see the albatross head in front of everything else?
Well, no, I see it a bit more more as a kind of overall I mean, the head of the bird kind of comes forward more obviously, but
I'm
the
thinking about your eyesight though.
oh
What you
no,
see
no, I mean, I
differently
can
than I
see like I
oh,
can see where things do things. I'm not blind.
yeah,
I just can't see it receding into spatial perspectival
yeah,
space as a stereo image. And so there, the flatness is very activated.
yeah,
Anyway, we should
yeah.
make a move. We keep going.
Well, that's a great, yeah, but that's a great thing about your paintings, this one too, that
Well,
they don't resolve
my
single
theory,
3D.
I just want to say one thing. My theory is that Matisse probably had lack of convergence too. Because who would be so sensitive to flatness unless it was
Well,
someone who can't see the alternative?
or
Anyway,
Cezanne too. It
no, no,
compromises
not Cezanne at all.
perspective,
No, Cezanne is not flat that way. Anyway,
but he has a lack of convergence. There's a lack of traditional perspectival space, something we also want to get back to. Continuing on with the slideshow.
anyway, then you see that left wall with the albatross, and then you see the back, and then if you keep going, I'm just trying to whip through this show. Then you see two paintings that are, for me, maybe the next slide shows them up close. Oh, no, wait, go back. Sorry, Chloe, go back to, yeah. I mean, I just wanted to say one of the kinds of structural iterations that I'm trying to make in this show is about sequence, and the other is about the imposition of a structure. And what happened, the reason that these two paintings I ended up hanging together was partly because the one on the left had a structure imposed on it after the painting was finished. You could go to the next slide and I'll show it to you. It was exactly as you see it, and I thought it was done for about 3 months. And then I decided it needed these red sort of, almost like if you were making the core like beams of a building more visible. I wanted to see the visual structure, so I made a series of red structural lines with angles and verticals and some horizontals to find out like where the structural strength or weakness of the painting was. And then if you go back again, you'll see what I did. Then I had this painting. Chloe, go back. Yeah. Oh, or just go to the next one. Sorry. Yeah. Then I had this painting kind of hanging around my room. And one day I thought, I was really interested in seeing that kind of post structure that was defined after the painting was so-called finished, which then I thought brought it to like yet another level of kind of clarity. And I want to see what happens if I impose that exact structure onto a completely different painting that wasn't made with the same underneath. And I basically did not copy exactly, but I kind of reiterated the structure in blue lines and dark blue lines instead of in red lines, or there's a couple reds, but mostly blue. And I thought, oh, wow, it works. Like there is this kind of iterative impulse inside paintings that are not even made to be next to each other, where a kind of bodily ratio that you as whoever your body is, like how your body works, which expresses a kind of ratio within itself, reasserts itself many times over because you yourself contain these kind of proportions and scale and sense of scale. And that sort of sense of scale, which is kind of like a sense of humor, means that you feel a certain kind of predilection toward a kind of lean or a kind of pushing or a kind of tipping or some kind of structural situation. So that's something else I'm always thinking about. So we could go on. We have another wall to get through. Okay, and then if you turn to the left from the big drawing wall, you see these three paintings drawings, big drawings. Haha, they're really drawings. And on the left is Minotaur, and that's the one I was listening to when I was listening to the Odyssey. And you can see it, it's kind of a Minotaur. It's also kind of like a baby grand. And then the next one, I made this painting is called Harpy, which is because I was still listening to the Odyssey and there were harpies in it, characters, but it also looked like a harp because it had this kind of stringed quality, like a lyre, and also kind of Odyssean. But I wanted to make the same structure that I had made again, but leave out all the figural stuff and just establish the kinds of densities and structures that were in the painting to the left of it in a more abstract way with line. And then if you go to the right of it, I tried to do it again, and it actually was just like the one Harpy, but it sort of changed and changed and changed as it went along. And after a while, it became this, which was Clown. And so it was kind of three personae, Minotaur, Harpy, Clown, and it sort of ends with comedy, I think. I think it's funny. I think it's kind of like somebody punching another, there's like to me, it's like somebody's standing there to the left with kind of the drape of their shoulder or maybe their arm kind of leaning over, and then they have kind of their hand against like their arm like this, but they're also kind of punching into the other thing, and below it is what could be a pair of pants. So that thing on the left could be your arm, and then the thing on the right could be the other side of that person's body, or it could be a kind of giant pipe coming out of the body, like as though it was smoking a pipe, or it could be a kind of huge organ that's kind of draping down from the torso and sort of drooping down sort of pendulously towards the bottom. So it's kind of this, everything is kind of a pun, I guess. It's a shifter of some kind. Anyway, those are the slides.
Well, thank you so much for that reflection on each of the works. I wonder, when going back to Albatross, what you have in mind with a title like Albatross or any of the titles? I mean, Albatross, of course, is a very symbolic
Yeah.
literary term, and it could be having to do with this. But what do you think? Why Albatross?
No, there's a reason. The reason is that in the middle of the show, after realizing, I don't know what I'm doing when I'm doing it. It's all very improv. But about halfway through the year, I mean, I spent a year making this show, and I made a whole ton of other paintings that we didn't even include. And it was a big year to me because I had 3 different shows, so there were many bodies of work. But by the time I got to this body of work, it was really clear to me that I was working with the idea of a torso, very specifically. And I was thinking of the figures all being upright, but I was thinking about this sort of sense of there being a kind of problem for the upright torso. And I've been thinking a lot lately about the difference between a, a, a laying down figure as a kind of general image. Like, what does it mean? The first time I saw a figure that was profoundly lying on its side in art, it was in the south of India, where I was in a cave, and I think it was a Buddhist cave, and it had a huge sculpture of the Buddha sleeping that was massive. I mean, it was, maybe 100 feet wide, and it had this peaceful look on its face. I mean, his face, I guess. And I was really taken, this was in 1979. I've been thinking about it ever since, but I was really taken with the meaning of a really important iconic figure who was a devotional figure, a figure of belief and prayer, who was sleeping. I thought it was really amazing that that was the image that was presented in this Buddhist cave. And I just obviously thought about like all the different paintings I've ever seen in my life of Jesus and other people, who are upright or being crucified or falling over or something. I mean, the only time you see people lying down, a lot of the time, the only there are many examples, there are many contradictions, but in a general sense, I mean, it makes you think like, oh yeah, the people who are lying in a Bruegel painting who are drunk, passed out on the ground, are kind of the big horizontal, the big verticals. I mean, I can never get this right. The people lying down are either drunk or dead in the West, but the person lying down in the East was the Godhead. And I was like amazed that this vision of like repose was the image you were supposed to be meditating on. So anyway, I just was always really interested in the upright versus the long falling down. I mean, the lying down. And so these were all upright figures, and I thought, what's the problem for them? And it made me think about the rhyme of the Ancient Mariner, and the albatross kind of hung around his neck. And I went back to the Google to look for pictures of the Ancient Mariner, and I found this amazing image that was I think an engraving for one of the first published books of the poem, and it had this beautiful, very Christ-like upside down, or even tarot card upside down kind of figure, bird figure, with its wings outstretched and its head facing down, and its feet tied to the neck of the guy. And that wasn't at all, I was thinking of an albatross as a problem that we all have. And then I realized that the albatross was a kind of substitute verticality, but it was upside down. And I thought that was really amazing to think about. And I thought, okay, I'm kind of painting the problem. So in the painting that we looked at, Albatross 2, I made Albatross 1, and then I made Albatross 2, and then I made Albatross 3. I made a drawing of the albatross. Like, I worked with the albatross for a while this winter or this spring because of this idea. I wanted to really really look carefully at what being upright but upside down was for me in a painting. So the bird is hanging upside down.
So it's great to hear you speak of Coleridge's great poem, The Rime of the Ancient Mariner. One of the things I wanted to talk to you about, and which you are inevitably going to talk about, is figuration versus abstraction. It's a little bit like perspective versus flatness in your work, which refuses to conform to binary divisions of that kind. Is the albatross figuration? Is it abstraction? Are you an abstract painter? Are you a figurative painter?
Yes.
You have gotten the right answer.
Yes, you're correct. All of that.
Yes.
No, the spirit of the work is figurative in the sense that I try to find, it's kind of like with a poem, I think. You're not writing a plot, but there is a kind of, I think there's a kind of figure ground or figure or object subject relationality at work. And you're sort of working with and against what that means. And that's how I sort of see it. I mean, I just don't, I can't say I'm a figurative painter because I'm using abstraction for all it's worth, which is worth a lot, in negating all of those ideas that I just said, like that there is a figure or a ground or a hierarchy between those two things, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm kind of working, I think, against all of that in sort of 3 dimensions.
So here's another opposition: slowness versus speed in terms of the making of the work, or also an obsession of mine, awkwardness versus resolution.
Yeah. I mean, I want to embrace something that I would like to call awkwardness, that I have called awkwardness. But I've been interested lately in this kind of idea of resolution. Like right after the show opened, a friend wrote me from another country. He had seen the show and then he had gone back to where he lives. And he wrote me a kind of critical note about what he didn't like about the show. And one of the things he said was that he didn't think that half the paintings, he didn't think all the paintings were resolved. And then I was talking to I was interested in that. I mean, I was kind of interested that that's what he said. And I was a little defensive. I was like, well, which ones? Send me pictures. I don't know which one to do. You know, like, what does that mean? I'm just supposed to feel bad? You got to prove it to me. Show me the ones you think. Anyway, so I asked for some proofs. And then I went to lunch with a friend who's an art historian who's great, Molly Warnock. And I was saying, I know so-and-so said they weren't really resolved. And Molly said to me, well, I wonder, what is resolution? Like, and then we started talking about resolution, and we were basically having a tuna fish sandwich talking about whether resolution was anything really so great, which is kind of like talking about whether mimesis is so great, which I don't think it always is. And, you know, it's kind of like saying, oh, perspective, you know, the implication of the Renaissance is that it's just fantastic that we invented perspective, but maybe perspective isn't so great. So, I mean, I think like thinking that like resolution is an important quality that we should aspire to is kind of a strange proposition when what you're actively trying to do is to create a question and a problem for the kind of quality of painting, you know, for the idea of like quality in painting. So I think awkwardness is like a shorthand for me for saying I want it to feel like the body, but I don't care if it doesn't actually conform to the optical volumes or rules of the body as it's seen. I want it to feel like the body, and the body is a very awkward and completely strange thing to inhabit. We all know this, like it's constantly falling apart and farting and having bad feelings and leaning the wrong way and tipping over. Like the body is a mess. And so being inside of one is like driving a jalopy for the whole time you're alive. And I don't know what it's like to be an athlete, obviously, but anyway, then you're riding around in this faulty vehicle and you're perceiving all of the things you know you're perceiving through this pathetic vehicle. And so I think it's really, that's kind of something that interests me, these kind of qualities of like pathos, comedy, disaster, sloppiness, falling apart. Those are all really important aesthetic problems that you could pose against, you know, high greatness of art. And then, but then if you do that, how can you be good at it? And what does it mean to be good at it? And that's something that really interests me. So I think I don't accept, I love my friend's challenge, like what's so great about resolution? Who even knows what it is? Because who can quite say? I find my paintings to be highly resolved. It takes me sometimes a year to make a painting, and it keeps changing radically. So like that means they're not resolved, I guess. And then I guess who's the boss of resolution? It's not art historians. It must be us. And then if we want it to sort of incorporate a kind of uncertainty and doubt, then how would it ever look resolved? So I think those are aesthetic problems.
Well, I agree with what you're saying, and I would say that the history of great art and poetry too is the resistance to irresolution, and in your case, in the search for vision, because irresolution allows for vision, it allows for transformation, it allows for metamorphosis. I think especially particularly Coleridge, Blake is really the great poet of irresolution or of the incommensurate, things that you think cannot go together, and yet for him, anything other than that is tyranny. Before we move on to the next segment, I want to go back again to the question of slowness of the process versus speed as something that we talked about, and I was interested in how you viewed that.
Well, you know what? In the drawings, this is something I've talked about with Felix, who happens to be the son of Charles, and who actually wrote a beautiful essay in the book that they're putting out at Gladstone about this show. But I talked about this with Felix a lot because Felix and I like to talk about psychoanalytic stuff. And I was telling him that I felt that the drawings were done, I know that the drawings were done very fast, like slapdash fast, like in an hour. Each drawing is like up maybe 5 minutes. And then the paintings take like a year. And I started thinking, oh my God, maybe my paintings are about shame and covering up and endless revision because it's just not good enough, not good enough. I got to do it again. Let me re-chisel it, refine its shape. Let me do things. And then the drawings were like bare, naked, fast as the wind. You know, it was just like being nude on the beach in front of people. And I was like, I guess the drawings are shameless in that sense. So in that way, I also wanted to, I'm happy with the show because I didn't even think about that kind of affect when I was making this, organizing the show. But the wall of drawings is very profound in the room because it's shameless. It's just there and you can see everything. And I did not really revise at all. And then the paintings are like an editing edit, session that lasts for a year. Like all it is rubbing things together until they produce new meaning and I can see and understand what to do next. Like frottage, endless physical bad relationship with something until it gets better. You know what I mean? And try to make it better, try to make it better. But like we were saying, don't make it better in the way that it looks good and knowledgeable and knowable. Make it better where it falls over the cliff and comes together and it's okay. Like rescue it or destroy it and see what happens. Like a very emotional struggle. And then the drawings are like no struggle and no shame. And I'm amazed that they work. And then everybody like loves the wall of drawings. So
I don't love the drawings more than the paintings. It's an impressive thing within the show. Do you ever discard a work or you just keep reworking, thinking of the paintings?
you know what? I have cut up. You can ask my assistant Jake and the other older assistant Nate, the prior one. They have to cut up my paintings that don't work sometimes. And they'll say to me, I'll be like, cut this up and throw it in the garbage. And they'll say, are you sure? They don't really like it. And which reminds me of a crazy story that I read recently, which I just feel like it's worth saying on this broadcast, which is I read that when the guy, I forget the guy's name, what's the name of the person who has Pace Gallery? What's the man's, somebody tell me, I can't remember. The Pace Gallery guy would go visit Agnes Martin in New Mexico, and Arnie Glimsher, thank you, smart person. I'm just looking at the thing. When apparently when Arnie Glimsher would go visit Agnes Martin, I read this, she would go, which one is best, or which one do you like, or which one is the best one? And then they would talk about it, and then she would go, okay, cut this one up. And she'd make him take a scissors or a knife and cut the paintings. I mean, I just think that is real chutzpah. But I do that. I do that. I do it, but I try to rescue. I have a recuperative bone in my body, and I try really hard to make the relationship work out. And it's all a relationship. And these are all my lovers, these things.
All right, so now let's move to the two videos of the Washington Post piece, and we'll go to the slides of that.
And the
you can take
collaboration.
us
Yeah.
through that. Yeah, collaborate, both of those things. Take us a walk through on the install of the video, and then we'll show that video. That's the Washington Post video, and then you can read the text you wrote for that.
Oh, it's 1 minute long. Okay, let's say the video that we're about to show, let me say one thing. It's made out of the drawings. Like the drawings in the back wall are the video, except it's all of them. And the music is by Marina Rosenfeld, and it's 1 minute long. So you only have to sit through 1 minute of video. Move that thing. So that's that.
So you want to either talk about the way you collaborated with Marina Rosenfeld on it, and also then read the Washington Post.
Well, the way I collaborated was just that I'm friends with Marina and I know that she's worked with sequence of sounds. And so I said to her at one point, I got invited by the op-ed editor of the Washington Post to do a series of op-eds, and I don't have any idea what would I do? Like I can't make an op-ed. I'm not a magazine, I'm not a journalist. I'm not an opinionator. So I didn't know how to do it. And then I just thought, okay, maybe we'll just make the thing I've been wanting to make with Marina. And so I gave her a kind of a little reel of all the drawings, just strung together, each for 1/10 of a second, and said, could you send me like 100 sounds in a row? And she said, well, it didn't quite come out that way, like a string of pearls, but she sent me something and then we cut it down to a minute, and then I cut the thing to suit her soundtrack, and I asked her to make it sound a little slapsticky. So that was it. And then they said, we love it, to their incredible credit at the Washington Post. And then they said, can you please write a text for it? And so I wrote something which I'm not going to read all of, but I will read one paragraph.
And we're going to put the whole thing online, courtesy of you. I think probably in the chat, so that you won't hit it.
Yeah, I'm just gonna read a little tiny bit of it. It's pretty short anyway, but I wrote, what I made is viewable here by playing the video above, a 1 minute long animated piece made of 300 drawings of a quasi-torso struggling to establish its own outlines amid a bunch of garbled calligraphy, set to a slapstick score by my friend, the artist and composer, Marina Rosenfeld. Maybe a sense of humor won't save anyone, what with a barbaric war in Gaza going on and murders that aren't called murders, zygotes who have more civil rights than women, presidents accessorized with gold sneakers and ice cream cones, trials of faux Vikings in moose furs who scale the Capitol, high schoolers toting semi-automatic weapons purchased at strip malls, rapacious men colonizing the world and depositing trinkets on the moon, ice melting, and volcanoes firing up while activists glue their heads to the Mona Lisa. But maybe in the face of all of that and more, I could respond with drawings of things teetering on the edge of recognition. Could a comic animation provoke 1 minute of productive confusion? I want these drawings to mirror the feeling in your gut as you turn away from the news and gaze downward in anguish at your own paunch, to portray you psychically trying to get yourself together as you droop, despair, and come undone. What if abstraction is not the grand form it's cracked up to be, but something we carry with us, half illegible, inefficient, and shabby? And I will leave the rest of it for you guys to read on your own.
I loved hearing you read it. Well, we have a surprise for you, kind of like This Is Your Life. We have your elementary school teacher, Mrs. Johnson, coming back. No, Lisa Robertson, the wonderful poet, my friend, and somebody you've collaborated with a couple of times on animated drawing, as well as the OG, the pamphlet, which we'll talk about in a minute. And you pick something of Lisa's to work with and distribute.
Wait, it's important to say the OG volume 16 that's at the gallery I made with John Hulsey to
Yeah,
the
well, we're gonna
yeah. But I just want to put his name out there.
Yeah, well, we're gonna show images of that.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna ask you about how you collaborated with him as well, with John Hulsey. But as the surprise, all the way from France, we have Lisa Robertson. Lisa, can you hear me? Are you there, Lisa?
Hi, Charles. Hi, Amy. I'm going to read a section from a poem called Face that was included in my book, Rousseau's Boat, and then Ours Boat, and now Boat. Maybe next time, Oats. face. The air goes soft, and I'm cushioned as by the skin of an animal. I can only make a report. Womanliness knows nothing and laughs. I can't live for leaves, for grass, for animals. All surfaces stream dark circumstance of utterance. I can't say any of these words. Gradually, the tree comes to speak to me. I collaborated with my boredom. I write this ornament, yet I had not thought of time. I come to you for information. Sometimes I'm just solid with anger, and I am certain I will die from it. I conceived of an organ slightly larger than skin, a structure of inhuman love minus nostalgia or time. If only I could achieve frankness. I could be quiet enough to hear the culverts trickling. I'm talking about weird morphing catalogs and fugitive glances. I could have been wrong. I subsist by these glances. I desire nothing humble or abridged. I'm using the words of humans to say what I want to know. I did not sigh. I confined my thievery to perishable items. I do not want to speak partially. I loosened against landscape. I doubt that I am original. I have been lucky, and I'm thankful. I dreamt I lied. I stole butter, and I studied love. Something delighted me. And if I am not cherished, I endlessly close. But just as strongly, I've willed myself towards this neutrality. I enjoyed that pleasure I now inhabit. I collaborated with my boredom. I experienced a transitive sensation to the left of my mind. I stood in the horizontal and vertical cultures of words like a bar in a graph. I feel like the city itself should confess. With the guilt that I quietly believe anything, I dreamt I lied. I felt pampered by the austerity. It pushed my hip, so I rolled. I desire nothing humble or abridged. I find abstraction in monotony, only an object falling. Yet I enjoyed sex in the shortening seasons. I had at my disposal my feet and my lungs and these slimnesses. I'm satisfied with so little. I had insisted on my body's joy and little else. I wish not to judge or to dawdle. I had no plan but to advance into Saturday. I had a sense that I'd strengthen and speak less. It was a chic ideal. Look, I'm stupid and desperate and florid with it. I have a figure of it. Had I the choice again, I'd enter whole climates superbly indifferent to abstraction. I have been like lyric.
Well, thank you, Lisa. And I will have Amy. We're going to show some pictures from the OG, and you could talk about the collaboration with both Lisa and John Halsey, and then we will turn it
Take it away.
over to Chloe for the Q&A because it's just turned 2 o'clock. So I leave it to you, and it's been a pleasure to talk to you.
Thanks, Charles. I'm just gonna say 1 minute of stuff. This is a picture of the zines stacked up in the front of the Gladstone desk. And if you haven't been to the show and you want to go, please be sure to give them $1. And they'll give you one. And I'm sure if you want one some other way, we can figure out how to get you one. But they cost $1 because it costs me $2 to make them. And so this is the cover, and John and I are friends who both love poetry and love to work together and love to read and talk about pictures and the way pictures and poems can go together. And so because we're really good friends and we like to hang out this winter, I said to him, hey, maybe I can make a zine for my show and we can just do something together. And he makes video and time-based work and installation, but he also takes photographs kind of around the city and wherever he's walking. He just tends to like photograph everything. And he has a very witty eye. And we both love Lisa's work. And Lisa's work has this kind of dialogic structure in some cases, where there's a line in Roman and a line that follows it in italic, and then it sort of cycles through, and the line in Roman appears in italic in another part of the poem. And so it's kind of a machine, a sort of structural machine, which of course appeals to me. And so we decided that he would take the italic lines and I would take the Roman lines, and we would just go our separate ways and make pictures for them. So basically it's called Pictures for Poem because we were both making pictures. And then what we had to do, if you go to the next slide, you can see it. What we did was we printed a couplet on every page, and then we decided we could only do a portion of the poem because it's a really long poem and we didn't have time. But we would take like, I don't know, 3 dozen lines, and he would make his pictures and I would make my pictures. In fact, I do the Roman and I'm always on the left, and he does the italic and he always is on the right. And then we had this marvelous weekend of editing where we had to edit our pictures to her lines, and then we had to edit our pictures to look good together, and then we had to edit our pictures with her lines that looked good in sequence with the thing that comes next to it, and then next to it, and then next to it. So there was this multi-part editing kind of job, which was an incredibly euphoric, fun thing to do with a friend. So that's basically what it is. It's just a little excerpt of her poem, and on each facing page, her couplet is there, and my one is on the left, and John's one is on the right, and they're calculated to go together. And it's just about going granular on a poem and trying to respond to it in an appropriate way. And that was it. It was a really fun project. And I do think that the reason it's good in this show is because of all those questions that you asked, Charles, like focusing on the slow, fast binary, the figurative abstraction binary, all the binaries, which are structuring logics. I feel like this thing takes that, multiplies it by 3, and then sets it down as like book pages. And I feel like that's like a really good way to deal with a binary, is to not accept it as a twosome and to make it into a multiplex. And that's kind of, we're going to try to do the whole poem, but we're going to make a video. Anyway.
And the excerpt that Lisa read was slightly longer than is in the OG.
Yeah, it's very short.
But it was the part that's in there, but we wanted to give you a sense of the larger feeling for that wonderful poem of Lisa Robertson. Over to you, Chloe.
Thank you so much, Amy and Charles. This has been an absolute pleasure to listen to. We have so many questions from the audience, and so I'm going to try to get to as many people as I can. The first question is from Ronnie. Ronnie, I'm going to give you the chance to unmute to ask.
Oh my God, this is such a thrill. Please pardon me, Amy, while I go mental that I'm actually asking you a question. You're such a hero of mine. But anyway, I have so many questions. I'm going to try to mash them up. This whole idea of layering, time, space, a question about your materials, because you use acrylic and oil. And I'm wondering if there's a sequence involved with how you use them, if the oppositional qualities of acrylic and oil are related to some of the ideas. And then your titles, are they generative? It sounds like you have ideas that percolate in your brain for years and years. Do they instigate the paintings, or the paintings emerge? Sounds like you're saying it's improv. The titles emerge from the paintings. And then the reason you keep going and going and going is you do have an ideal of where you want to go. So those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Just to be really brief, you have to put oil under acrylic or it cracks. So it's oil first, acrylic. No, I'm sorry, acrylic first, oil second. And no, it's not about the meaning of the material. It's just that acrylic isn't as poisonous. And I'm trying to work on something for a year, and I prefer not to muck around for half the year. Maybe I can use something a little bit less toxic, but I still love that toxic oil paint. So I do it, but it's like when things get more interesting, then I get into the oil part, but I allow myself to like use the stupid materials underneath. And then the titles are like walking and talking, improv thinking. And one day, you know, somebody might come over, or I'll see something in the newspaper, or I'll read something, or something will pop in my head, and I'll think, oh, damn, that's the title. Really obvious. And sort of that's it. Like before it has that click, it just is not titled. And I think it's about reading and listening, which I think is what poets do. I'm not quite sure, but I've worked with poets for a long time because I taught at Bard forever and ever, at Bard MFA, where there is a poetry program embedded with the art program. And it was a greatest thing in my life. One of the great things to work with the poets and learn to not be afraid of the abstraction of poetry and see it as part of my own materiality. So I think I feel like I use language the way my friend poets, Charles among them, you know, has taught me that you can just treat it like material.
Thank you, Ronnie, so much for those questions. And thank you, Amy, for that answer. The next question is going to be from Phyllis. Phyllis, I will give you the chance to unmute.
Okay. Amy, your show's fantastic.
Thank you.
And I put in the chat, I saw it on a sunny day, which added light. So I saw the torsos, which intrigued me, and I own a print. And one day I was looking at the print and I saw the torso and I went, oh my God. Okay. But you have a lot of paintings with stripes and you didn't mention the stripes. So could you talk about that?
Yep.
Please?
I could happily talk about it. In a nutshell, I did not prepare this. It sounds like I have a canned answer, but I was thinking about this recently, so I can answer quickly. Two things. I once read this marvelous little tiny book about that's called A History of Stripes, or A Brief History of Stripes. And I read it years ago, like a decade ago, but I love it. I love that little book. And it basically talked about how stripes were the ultimate ambivalent symbol, because you can't tell whether the black is in front or the white is in front, you know, like you don't know which is the foreground and which is the background. So it's a vacillating, oscillating, spatial ambivalence. And that is why apparently they would make prisoners wear those garments, because they're the symbol of an untrustworthy kind of narrator. So like if the character is in stripes, it means that you can't trust them because you don't really know what's coming and what's going. So I love this whole thing that was knitting together the history of stripes as a material, stripes as a symbol, stripes as a visual phenomenon. And I loved that. Of course, I adore ambivalence. So it's a structural aesthetic for me. So I always thought about stripes as an interesting thing for that reason. And then I forgot all about that. That wasn't in my mind at all. It was just kind of there. And I was working on a painting that wasn't working. And I was like, I want to get rid of this, but I want you to be able to see a little bit behind it. But it's a 10-pound thick oil painting that you will never be able to, I can't scumble over it because it'll crack. So how am I going to like screen it? And so basically like I started just drawing. And the other thing is one other thing. So it was a way of screening. And then there's one other component that's really important to me. I can't see space, like I said, but what I'm a crack eye at is ratio. So for many years, I've been working with the ratio between two vertical lines. And I'm interested, some of my drawings are just vertical lines, but I usually don't show those. But I mean, I do have like a whole sort of undercurrent of minimalism that I can draw from occasionally, where I literally might just look at the space between two things and see whether that space feels right, or how that space is different from the space that's smaller next to it. And so those kind of micro decisions and feelings about space are available to me if I kind of stripe over or mark over, like I was talking about, a structural space over a kind of mishmash of painting. So stripes are also just a way to measure, and it's like a ruler. And so in all of those, so for all of those reasons, stripes.
Thanks.
Thank you, Phyllis. Thank you so much, Amy, for that answer. And thank you, Phyllis, for that question. The next question is from Ellen. Ellen, would you like to unmute or would you like me to read on your behalf? I'll give you the chance to unmute if
Hey,
you
thank you. Hi. Hi, Amy. Congratulations on your show. And I have a question. I don't see her here. I don't know why. There she is. Hi. We had a question of what the process is like, say for, I know there's no such a thing as average day in a studio, but what's it like, say, when you walk into your studio and you begin whatever you begin and whatever you do, and I'm hearing bits and pieces of it kind of throughout, like literary people coming over, but what's it like for you, say, when you first walk into your studio, and then to the time when you basically, so-called punch the clock at the end of the day in the studio? What's like an average, I hate that word average, but what's it like for one day in a studio?
Come in, drink coffee, procrastinate, ruin something, get my email, go out for lunch, procrastinate, try to make something, make some phone calls, get really mad, take the dog for a walk, tell someone I can't meet them, bail on a plan, take a nap, read a poem, watch something stupid comic thing on TV, laugh about it, send it to a friend, procrastinate, ruin a thing, decide not to go to an opening, make phone calls, 1 hour of really, really intense work. Now we're at 11 o'clock at night, go home. Watch a TV show and go to sleep.
See, that's a poem itself. It's an old-time list poem, a wonderful one too. Improvised.
So good. Thank you so, so much, Ellen, for that question. And thank you, Amy, for that answer. The next question is going to be from Tim. Tim, I'll give you the chance to unmute to ask.
Thank you. Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Charles. And thanks to the Rails for this event and all the events. A well-earned hiatus is coming. So, Amy, I see so much like Matisse, almost like a dream-like Matisse in all this work. Like I'm seeing all my favorite ones, layered on top of each other, kind of transparency, seeing them all at once. And by that, I mean so much drawing. I've always admired, identified with your commitment to drawing. And these things are kind of like, so is drawing, like drawing as a verb? Is it drawing that gives it such a sense of deep time when I see these things? They're like something like that you see once and then you remember it differently. And then you remember it again, you remember it differently again, and over and over and over again. So I wonder if you can kind of talk about drawing in time.
Well, I mean, I think drawing, like I was talking earlier about drawing as being this kind of shameless immediacy. I mean, I think on the one hand, it allows you to just make a mark and move on. But you can also obviously do that sequentially, inside the frame, right? So you can build forward, or you can just move on to the next piece of paper. And I mean, we all know everybody feels freer on paper because it's cheaper. I mean, it's, if you spend a month like preparing 10 canvases, it's a lot of dough, a lot of time, and a lot of care. And then you're like, okay, now I can start, and it's like you really feel horrible about wrecking it. But you don't feel horrible about wrecking every single one of a stack of paper this big, right? So it's about preciousness, like non-preciousness. I think that's really important to me. And I don't show a lot of my drawings, most of them, and I make so many drawings. So I mean, I show a bunch of my paintings, not all of them by any measure, but I don't make that many. I don't release that many paintings. That's what it's called. I was told, like, I make a lot of paintings, but I cover them all up and make new ones on top. So there's very few paintings that come out of my studio, but I mean, I don't really let that many drawings come out, but they're in my boxes. So I have a billion drawings. So I think it's just literally like, one is like, Fritos, and the other one is like, some kind of chicken, ravioli. I mean, it's like something that takes a long time to prepare. So, I mean, it's not like drawings are junk food. They're actually sort of fundamental, but I think it's mostly just that drawing can be slow or fast. I don't feel I can make a really fast painting very easily. I would rarely leave it really alone, although I have. And when it looks really good to me, and I don't think there's anything that needs to be questioned, I occasionally leave it after one go. And I love those paintings. If I could get them all to be like that, I'd be lucky. But, you can't like shoot it into the pocket right away. Sometimes it needs developmental steps. I just think it's about relationships. Literally, like, I'm in a very deep relationship with all the paintings, even if they're done quickly. And the drawings I'm not really worried about. And they're just playful. I mean, they're not playful. I hate that kind of sounding thing, but like, they're seriously meant, but they're casual. And they're a place where you can figure out what's going on. And then I really love the work of people for whom drawing is primary. Matisse is primary. I mean, Michaud, it's primary. Etel Adnan, Marlene Dumas, Nancy Spiro, Ida Appleberg, like some of my favorite painters. I feel that the drawing is the engine. And I do feel that about myself. I do not feel like a painter. So it's just about commitment.
Thank you so much, Tim, for that question. And thank you, Amy, for that answer. We have 3 more questions. If you'll have them, I'll ask them on behalf of the remaining ones. The first one is going to be from Lissa. Lissa is curious about your creative process, Amy, working with so many layers in your paintings. How do you know when a work is done?
You don't. End of question.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for that question, Lissa. Fong has a question that I'm going to ask on his behalf. He is wondering how Merleau-Ponty's phenomenology of perception has shaped your thinking about the body.
You know what? I think Fong thinks that I read that. I don't think I really read it carefully enough to make that comment. I can't. I have read some Merleau-Ponty and a lot of phenomenology, so I know what it is. But for me to comment about it and how it's shaped my thinking, it would sound entirely pretentious for me to make a claim to that, to make any truth claim about that. So I can't make a truth claim. I can say that I appreciate the doubt that Merleau-Ponty articulates and mines and like fleshes out deeply, and the uncertainty and the provisionality of perception and the deeply intelligent nature of the body as the perceiving organ. But to be really honest, if I said more than that, it would be inappropriate to such an august thinker who I should probably have studied to better.
Thank you.
I think you did very well because the essential thing that Fong is asking about, you responded to. And I would only say that this whole wonderful hour and 20 minutes with you has been a demonstration of doubt as conviction, doubt as vision.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you, Amy, for those answers. The last question is from Carrie. Carrie's question is, how is a sense of scale like a sense of humor?
Oh, that's such a great question. I mean, I guess related to Fong's question in the sense that it's about the sense. It's about the senses, and it's about the sensible, and it's about the sensation, and it's about sensation as intelligence and cognition, or it's where it begins. And I think that like where sensation begins is very uncertain and shifting and provisional and kind of open and curious and quite unknowable. And then when it gets mediated through the brain, it becomes doubt, what we call doubt. But that can't be the case when you're looking, when you're first just running into the water, you're not doubting, right? So doubt is where that beauty of like experience and sensation becomes vexed with like, what is it? Will I step on a ray? Will I die? Will I get bitten by a shark? Like, can I swim? I don't know how. Shall I swim? I don't look good in a bathing suit. Might I get an ear infection? You know, like all of the things that you might worry about are about passing through limitations. And then there's this sort of sensorium that's going on in everyone's head that's individuated. And then there's this kind of collective groping toward knowledge that comes and goes like tides. So the experience of being alive is of sensation mingling with something that you can count on and then realizing that you can't count on it. And so all of that, I think, begins with a commitment to a primary kind of sense knowing.
Thank you so much, Amy. And thank you all so much for your questions today. I'm sorry we weren't able to get to absolutely all of them, but I'm so grateful to everyone for sending us your questions, and to you, Amy and Charles, for this conversation, which has been such a pleasure to listen to. I'd also like to thank Demetria and Aaron at Gladstone Gallery, who have been so supportive in preparing for today's event, as well as Amy's studio. And if you're in NYC on June 13th, I encourage you to head to Gladstone Gallery's website to sign up for the book launch, where Amy Sillman will be with Felix Bernstein to talk about the new publication. The show is on until June 15th, a couple of days later as well. And I hope if you are in New York, you go see the show. We'd also like to thank the Terra Foundation for American Art, who sponsor our new social environment program and who made this conversation possible, as well as all the others the past 2 years. Their support of our growing archive is also very vital, and you can view this conversation and others on the Rails YouTube channel. The Rail has been free and independent for 23 years. A donation directly supports our work. You can donate to us at the link in the chat. And as we've said, the Rails NSE is going on its very first summer break. We encourage you to register for our newsletter and follow us on Instagram this summer, where we'll be sharing episodes from our archive of over 1,000 episodes. And we look forward to seeing you on September 3rd when we return. And as is Rail tradition, we'll now turn on the microphones and everyone can say hello and goodbye as you leave. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Chloe.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank you, Amy.
you, Charles.
Thank you.
Amazing
Thank you,
questions.
Chloe.
The Rail.
Thank
It's
you.
a great,
Fantastic.
great episode to
Thank
end
you.
on.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Good.
Thank you,
What a
everybody.
wonderful.
Have a great summer, everyone.
Thank you. Have a wonderful time. Thank you, Rail.
See you in
Thank you, Mom.
September.
Thank you, everybody who's here
Thank you
and
for
everybody.
your
Thank you,
giving
everybody.
and your
Thank you,
generosity.
Charles.
Thank you, Amy and
Bye.
Charles, so
Everyone.
much. Bye, everyone.